Hello, listener. I need you to think about something for just a moment before I tell you what's happening here in Fort Worth right now. Think about the last time you were somewhere with a massive crowd around you. A concert, a stadium, a street festival, somewhere you were packed in with thousands of other people, and you could feel the collective energy of all those bodies moving together. Now think about what happens to a crowd like that when something goes wrong. Not wrong like the sound system cuts out or it starts raining. Wrong in a way that nobody has a word for yet. Wrong in a way that the people at the front of the crowd can see and the people at the back can't. And the information travels slow and wrong through 10,000 bodies. And by the time everyone understands what's happening, it's already too late to do anything orderly about it. That's the stockyards right now. And I'm on the air because I don't have a choice. My name is David Morgan, and under normal circumstances, I host the evening drive on 105.3 FM here in Fort Worth, which means I play Texas country from 3 to 7 and talk about traffic on I-35 West and remind people that summer in North. Texas is survivable if you drink enough water and don't make any sudden movements outdoors between 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. Today is Saturday. The Chisholm Trail Roundup starts tonight. The Stockyards District, which on a normal Saturday afternoon holds maybe 4,000 people between the tourists and the locals and the people working the restaurants and shops, currently has somewhere between 8 and 12,000 people in it because the pre-festival afternoon kicked off at noon. That is the number I need you to hold in your head. 8 to 12,000 people in a 35-acre district surrounded by Fort Worth's highway infrastructure on every side, with the Trinity River to the west and a rail yard to the east and 2 bridges that are now, as of the past 11 minutes, both completely gridlocked with vehicles that aren't moving. My producer tonight was supposed to be Ray Delgado, who is 28 years old and who has been working this station since he was an intern at 23, and who called me 14 minutes ago from the stockyards while he was setting up our remote BROADCAST equipment for the festival coverage we'd been planning for 6 weeks. He called me at 4:23 p.m., and the first thing he said was not a greeting, not his name, not anything normal. The first thing Ray Delgado said was, "David, something just happened at the cattle pens, and I need you to get on the air right now." I got on the air. Ray stayed on the line. And what he described to me over the next 4 minutes while I was trying to understand whether I was having some kind of elaborate practical joke played on me is what I'm going to describe to you now, as carefully and accurately as I can, because the people in Fort Worth need to understand what's happening before they do something that gets them hurt. At approximately 4:15 p.m., one of the handlers in the historic cattle pens at the north end of the stockyards was attacked by a steer that had been behaving erratically for approximately 20 minutes prior. This is not, by itself, unusual. Cattle handling is dangerous work, and animals in crowded pen conditions become agitated and unpredictable. What made this incident different is what happened to the handler after the steer gored him. He was knocked down, sustained what appeared to be significant injuries to his torso and left arm, and lost consciousness. Bystanders on the observation walkway above the pens called for help, and festival medical volunteers responded within approximately 3 minutes. 2 of those medical volunteers were bitten by the handler at 4:21 a.m., not gored by the steer, not injured by accident, bitten by the handler who had lost consciousness 8 minutes earlier and who, according to Ray, who was close enough to see this from the walkway, was not moving in a way that made any sense given the injuries he had sustained. Moving in a way that was wrong. Moving in a way that was. Ray used this word, and I want to use his word because it's the right one. Impossible. At 4:29 p.m., I'm on the air, and I don't know yet what I'm dealing with. But I know Ray Delgado is not a person who panics or exaggerates. I know the stockyards is currently filled with between 8 and 12,000 people celebrating the beginning of a festival. And I know that 2 medical volunteers who went to help an injured man were themselves injured 6 minutes after that man should. have been unconscious or dead, and now those 2 volunteers are somewhere in that crowd. Fort Worth police were on scene at the stockyards at 4:26 p.m. because they're always on scene at the stockyards during major events. Ray says he can see 3 officers near the cattle pens, and they're not managing the situation so much as standing in front of it trying to make a decision. The injured handler, who Ray is still watching from the walkway, has moved approximately 40 feet from where he first fell. He's moving through a service corridor that runs alongside the pens. Nobody has stopped him because nobody is quite sure what they're looking at, and by the time they're sure, Ray says it's going to be very difficult to manage. At 4:31 p.m., the first emergency call came into Fort Worth Police Dispatch, not from the cattle pens, from the White Elephant Saloon, which is 3 blocks south of the pens and which has approximately 250 people inside it right now for the pre-festival afternoon. I want everyone listening in the Fort Worth area to hear me say this clearly and calmly, and without the kind of dramatic language that causes people to make bad decisions. Do not go to the stockyards right now. Do not try to pick up family members who are at the festival. Do not drive toward the stockyards district for any reason. If you are at the stockyards right now, I need you to listen to what I say next very carefully. Ray is still on the line. He says the crowd on Exchange Avenue, which is the main street through the stockyards, has started moving in an unorganized way, not panicking yet. People sense that something is wrong, the way crowds do, through the collective peripheral vision of 10,000 people all noticing that the energy has shifted, but they don't know specifically what's wrong yet. Some are moving toward the cattle pens to see what's happening. Some are moving away. The people moving toward it are the ones I'm worried about. At 4:33 p.m., Ray said something that made me go very quiet for about 4 seconds. He said the handler, the man who fell in the cattle pens, had reached the festival crowd on Exchange Avenue, and the 2 medical volunteers who were bitten, they're not where the first responders left them. Ray doesn't know where they are. He's describing this from a second-floor walkway with a wide view of the district, and he's talking in the controlled, focused voice of someone who is very frightened and has decided that being frightened isn't useful right now. Ray, I need you to stay exactly where you are. Do not come down from that walkway for any reason. He said, okay. Then he said, David, I can see Billy Bob's from here. There's already a line forming outside for tonight's show. There are at least 500 people standing on the sidewalk waiting to get in. Texas Motor Speedway has nothing on what a 1,000-person crowd does when it starts moving in the wrong direction. Billy Bob's Texas, for anyone who doesn't know, is the largest honky-tonk in the world. On a roundup Saturday, it holds 4,000 people easily. If 500 people outside that building have no idea what's coming toward them from 3 blocks north, we have a situation that's going to become catastrophic in a window of minutes. At 4:36 p.m., I made 2 calls simultaneously using my studio lines while keeping Ray on the third. I called Fort Worth Police Public Information. I called the Stockyards Management Office. Neither answered with a human voice. Both went to automated systems. I left messages on both that I want to go on record as having left, because when people start asking what was done in the first 20 minutes, I want it documented that a radio station tried every official channel it could reach. At 4:38 p.m., Fort Worth officer Maria Santos, who patrols the Stockyards district and who I've interviewed twice for our local news segments, and who is one of the sharpest police officers I've had the pleasure of speaking with, called into the station directly. She said she'd heard we were on emergency frequency, and she wanted to give me a situation report that she needed broadcast immediately. We have multiple violent incidents at the stockyards. The first injured individual from the cattle pens is responsible for at least 6 secondary injuries, all bites, and I cannot overstate how not normal this person's behavior is. We cannot restrain him. We attempted standard control measures and they failed. He does not react to pain in any way, that suggests he's registering pain as information. We have 2 officers down with bites, both showing rapidly developing fever and confusion. I am requesting every available unit to the Stockyards district immediately. And I am telling you right now, the crowd on Exchange Avenue is at the edge of panic, and if it tips into full panic, we're going to have a stampede problem on top of everything else. Officer Santos, how many confirmed people showing the violent behavior right now? As of 2 minutes ago, 9 from 1, in approximately 20 minutes. At 4:41 p.m., I'm going to tell you what I know about transmission from what Officer Santos told me and from what Ray has been describing from the walkway. And I need you to absorb this clearly. Whatever this is spreads through bites. The handler bit the volunteers. The volunteers bit others. Whatever this is does something to a person's nervous system within minutes of exposure, causing complete loss of pain response, complete loss of social behavior, complete loss of everything except aggression directed toward other living people. It does this in under 20 minutes. And it started at 4:15 p.m. in one of the most crowded entertainment districts in North Texas on the biggest festival Saturday of the year. The Trinity River bridges are gridlocked at 4:43 p.m. I-35W access roads are backing up. Main Street and Commerce Street are both developing traffic situations as people who were at the festival are trying to leave and people who were on their way to the festival are still arriving. We have incoming traffic meeting, outgoing traffic on every road feeding the Stockyards district, and nobody is moving. Ray just said something I need to repeat verbatim. He said, "The crowd is going." And then 30 seconds of audio that I am not going to describe in detail, but which I am going to say sounded like nothing I ever wanted to hear coming through a phone line. Stay on this frequency. I'm David Morgan, 105.3 FM, and Fort Worth is going to need this voice tonight. Don't go anywhere. Ray came back on the line at 4:47 p.m. His voice was controlled, but I could hear him breathing harder than normal. The kind of breathing that happens when you've just moved fast and you're trying not to show it. He's still on the walkway, which is the only place I'm comfortable with him being, because from up there, he can see everything and nothing can reach him without being visible first. He described the next 4 minutes from his elevated position, while I stayed on the air and tried to give people information that would help rather than information that would cause 400,000 Fort Worth residents to simultaneously try to do something dangerous. This is the balance I'm trying to hold right now, and I want you to know I'm aware of it. Too little information, and people make uninformed decisions. Too much information too fast, and people make panicked decisions. Both get people killed. So I'm going to tell you what I know in the order that helps you most. The Stockyards crowd separation happened at 4:44 p.m. Ray described it as a wave moving through the crowd on Exchange Avenue, which, if you know the Stockyards, you know is a wide Western-themed street lined with restaurants and shops and the kind of planked wooden sidewalks that look great in photographs and are absolutely terrible for moving large numbers of frightened people quickly. The wave started at the north end near the cattle pens and moved south toward the Livestock Exchange building and Billy Bob's. And it wasn't a stampede in the classical sense, where everyone runs in one direction. It was a split, like a current hitting a rock, where people near the source of the danger ran south, and people farther south, who didn't yet understand the danger, stood still, or moved toward the commotion out of curiosity. The people who moved toward the commotion out of curiosity, in Ray's view from the walkway, are the ones I'm most worried about right now. At 4:49 p.m., Fort Worth police issued an emergency dispersal order for the Stockyards district through their PA system and through Texas DPS emergency alert. If you received an alert on your phone in the past few minutes, that's what it was. The order is to evacuate the Stockyards district immediately using the designated evacuation routes, which are Main Street going east and Northside Drive going west. Stay away from Exchange Avenue. Stay away from the cattle pens. Do not stop for anything. Proceed directly to your vehicles if you can reach them safely, and leave the area. What I need to add to that official guidance, because official guidance doesn't always account for the specific reality on the ground, is this. If you are currently in the stockyards and you cannot reach your vehicle safely because the parking areas are blocked or because reaching your vehicle requires going toward the affected area, do not try to reach your vehicle. Find the nearest substantial building with a lockable door and get inside it. A locked door between you and whatever is on Exchange Avenue right now is worth more than a car you can't safely reach. At 4:51 p.m., I received my first call from someone inside the stockyards crowd. Her name is Kaisha, and she's with her husband and 2 daughters, who are 9 and 11 years old. And they'd been at the festival since 1 p.m., having what she described as a perfect day until about 10 minutes ago. She's calling from inside a shop on Exchange Avenue, where the owner locked the door when the crowd started running. There are approximately 20 people inside the shop, and she can see through the window what's happening outside, and she's asking me what to do. Kaisha, you are doing exactly the right thing. You are inside a locked building with 20 other people, and you are away from the crowd. I need you to stay there. I need everyone in that shop to stay calm, stay away from the windows, and not open that door for anyone until you hear official clearance that the area is safe. Can you tell me the name of the shop so I can note your location? She said it's a Western wear store called Lone Star Leather on Exchange Avenue near 3rd Street. She said the owner is a 60-year-old man named Dale who has a shotgun under the counter and is currently very calm and very focused and has told everyone inside that nobody is going in or out until he says so. I told her Dale sounds like exactly the person you want to be locked in a room with right now. And I mean that completely sincerely. At 4:53 p.m., Ray updated me from the walkway. The 9 confirmed infected Officer Santos mentioned have multiplied through contact with the crowd. He's watching from above, and he estimates 20 to 30 individuals currently in the stockyards, showing the aggressive behavior, moving through the crowd and the chaos, targeting anyone close to them. In a crowded festival environment where everyone is already pushing and moving and disorganized, the infected are finding victims faster than they would in a stationary population because the crowd movement is bringing new people into proximity constantly. What Ray also told me at 4:54 p.m. is something I've been thinking about since he said it. He said the infected aren't just attacking randomly within their immediate reach. They're moving toward concentrations of people, toward the loudest and most crowded areas, in a way that looks directed. Not intelligent, not planned, but directional, like they're following the loudest signal toward the densest source, which means every group of people huddled together in fear is creating exactly the kind of signal that will draw infected toward them. Silence and separation might protect you more than numbers. I'm going to tell this to everyone listening who is currently sheltering inside a building in or near the stockyards. Get quiet. If you have a crowd in your shelter location, bring the noise level down as much as you can. Don't shout, don't scream unless it's an emergency. Don't have loud conversations that can be heard from outside. Make yourselves as acoustically invisible as possible. At 4:57 p.m., the first news helicopter went up over the stockyards. Channel 11 out of Dallas-Fort Worth launched their traffic chopper and redirected it here when the emergency alerts went out, and their live feed is being monitored by Kate Briggs here at the station. Kate is not my producer tonight. Kate is our station manager, and she is 52 years old and has been running this place since before I was hired. And she drove here from her house in Westover Hills in about 12 minutes when I called her, which tells you everything about Kate. She's watching the helicopter feed and feeding me information while I broadcast, which means I now have eyes at street level through Ray and eyes from above through Kate, and this frequency connecting both of them to everyone in Fort Worth. Kate's description of what the helicopter is showing at 5:01 p.m. Exchange Avenue is partially cleared of crowd in the northern section near the cattle pens and now shows clusters of infected moving south. Approximately 30 to 40 individuals visible from altitude, scattered through the street and spilling into alleys and side streets. The southern end of the stockyards near Billy Bob's shows a crowd of several hundred still concentrated on the sidewalks, some moving toward the evacuation routes, some unable to move because of the pressure of bodies. The parking areas east and west of Exchange Avenue show heavy vehicle congestion with almost no movement. There are active confrontations visible from altitude in at least 4 locations, but the helicopter can't provide the resolution to distinguish between infected attacking people and people fighting each other in the panic. At 5:04 p.m., I need to address something directly to the people who are currently stuck in that parking gridlock, trying to get out of the stockyards. I know your instinct is to stay in your car, because a car feels like protection. A car is not protection from something that doesn't respond to pain and can break a car window. If your vehicle is stationary and you are in a parking area that infected individuals could reach on foot, your car is not a refuge, it's a container. If you can see any infected activity near your parking area, I need you to carefully and quietly exit your vehicle, lock it, and move on foot to the nearest secure building. Moving on foot is faster than waiting in a car that isn't going anywhere, and it gives you options that sitting stationary does not. The Fort Worth Police Department issued a second statement at 5:06 p.m. through their public communication channels. They're requesting mutual aid from Tarrant County Sheriff's Office, from the Texas Department of Public Safety, and they've placed a call to the Texas Military Department requesting National Guard activation. The request has been made. Response time is unknown. In the interim, FWPD is directing all available units to the Stockyards District, but simultaneously acknowledging that containing the situation requires resources they don't currently have on hand in sufficient quantity. At 5:08 p.m., Officer Santos called me back. Her voice has changed, not in a frightened way, in the way that voices change when a person has made a decision about how they're going to face something, and the decision is final. She said, "David, I have one thing I need you to broadcast, and it is the most important piece of tactical information we have right now, and we got it the hard way." She said, "Center mass shots do not stop them. We have discharged multiple rounds at center mass at infected individuals who continued advancing after hits that should have been instantly incapacitating. The only reliable stop is headshot. I need you to tell every armed citizen in Fort Worth who is near this situation that they need to know this before they make a decision to engage." I broadcast it immediately. Officer Santos, who I should mention has been on the force for 14 years, and is not someone who says things she doesn't mean, confirmed it again for clarity before ending the call. I don't give firearms tactical advice on this frequency under any normal circumstances. Tonight is not any normal circumstance. At 5:11 p.m., Ray told me something from the walkway that I want to describe carefully because it changes the picture I've been building for the past 45 minutes. He said the infected that he's been watching move through the stockyards are starting to show internal variation. Not all of them are moving the same way. The ones that have been infected the longest, the ones from the earliest incidents near the cattle pens, are already showing what Ray describes as slowing. Less coordinated than they were 30 minutes ago, still aggressive when they encounter people, still dangerous, but not moving with the same terrible efficiency they were moving with initially. This is important. This tells us the infection has a progression, a rise and a peak and a decline, just like every biological process. The infected who are created first are now the least mobile. If that pattern holds, the infected being created right now from the current round of bites are going to peak in 20 to 40 minutes and then begin their own decline. We're not dealing with a static threat. We're dealing with a wave. And waves, no matter how powerful, eventually break. The question is what the wave breaks against. And right now, the shore is 500 people still standing on the sidewalk outside Billy Bob's, Texas. At 5:13 p.m., the Billy Bob's management made the decision to open the doors and let the crowd outside come in. Kate is watching the helicopter feed, and she saw it happen. The doors opening, the crowd streaming inside. And my first instinct was to say no. Don't concentrate people in one place, because the noise will attract infected. But then Kate said something that reframed it completely. She said, "David, Billy Bob's holds 4,000 people. It's a concrete block building with one primary entrance and a staff entrance in the back. It's designed to control crowd flow. And the crowd that was outside waiting was going to become infected victims in the next 5 minutes if they stayed on that sidewalk. So the choice was between a large building with lockable doors and a sidewalk. The sidewalk wasn't going to win. Kate is right. Billy Bob's is the right call." At 5:15 p.m., Fort Worth's best and worst characteristic is doing what it always does in a crisis. The best characteristic is that Texans do not wait for someone to tell them what to do. The worst characteristic is that Texans do not wait for someone to tell them what to do. The police scanner Kate is monitoring is full of reports of armed citizens engaging infected individuals in the vicinity of the stockyards, some effectively and some in ways that are creating secondary problems, because people without tactical training engaging a chaotic situation in a crowd environment can create as much danger as they resolve. What I need everyone with a firearm who is near the stockyards to hear is this: if you are in a position of safety right now, stay in that position. Your weapon is most valuable as last resort personal defense, not as offensive engagement in a chaotic crowd environment where what's behind your target might be another survivor. Engage only when you or someone physically next to you is in immediate danger and there is no other option. This is not a request to be passive. This is a request to be accurate about what accuracy requires. At 5:17 p.m., Ray's walkway position became compromised. He told me without any particular alarm in his voice, as if he were reading traffic conditions, that there are 3 infected individuals at the base of the stairs leading to his walkway, and that 2 of them have begun climbing. The stairs are narrow and steep in the historic stockyard style, and the infected are having difficulty navigating them, which gives Ray time. But it gives him minutes, not more than that, and he needs a place to go. "Ray, what's on that walkway with you?" He said, "A maintenance door that leads into the Livestock Exchange building's 2nd floor. He said he's been looking at it for the past 10 minutes, and it has a push-bar handle, and he thinks it's unlocked." "Try the door, Ray." The door was unlocked. Ray got through at 5:18 p.m. and pushed a heavy storage shelf against the door from the inside and called me back from what he says is a file room on the 2nd floor of the Livestock Exchange building, which for anyone who doesn't know is the historic brick building at the center of the stockyards that was built in 1902 and has walls about 16 inches thick and windows that are original single pane from the early 20th century and small enough that a person would have significant difficulty getting through them. Ray is in a good position now, and I told him that, and he said he knew, and then he said he could hear people downstairs. Not infected downstairs, people, at least a dozen voices, low and controlled, which meant whoever was in that building had already made the decision to be quiet and careful. The Livestock Exchange building has offices, a hotel on the upper floors, and a restaurant on the main level, all of which would have had occupants when this started. The people Ray can hear below him are survivors who had the same instinct he did, which was to get inside a thick-walled historic building and figure out the next thing from there. At 5:21 p.m., I got a call from the Livestock Exchange Hotel's front desk. The caller identified herself as Patricia Nguyen, the hotel's assistant manager, who has approximately 45 guests currently checked in, plus whatever walk-in traffic there was for the festival. She's sheltered them in the restaurant, on the main floor, and in the hotel conference rooms. And she's asking 2 questions. First, how long does she need to keep them there? Second, and she said this with the particular calm of someone who has decided that calm is the professional response to crisis, One of her guests was outside when the incident began on Exchange Avenue and came back to the hotel with a bite wound on his forearm. And he's currently showing a high fever, and she's asking what she should do. Patricia, I'm going to answer your second question first because it's more urgent. Whoever that guest is, they need to be separated from the other guests immediately. Not punitively, not without compassion, but separated right now, while there's still a cognitive window to do it cooperatively. Get them into a room alone. Lock the door. Tell them the truth. They have been bitten. You need to keep them isolated for the safety of everyone in the building, and you will not leave them alone without information or contact. But they cannot be with the other guests. She said she understood. She said she'd already been thinking about it and needed to hear it said out loud. I answered her first question. I don't know exactly how long, but I know the infected are mobile for a limited window, and that window appears to be declining for the individuals who are infected earliest. Stay where you are for now. At 5:25 p.m., Kate's helicopter feed is showing the overall stockyard situation with the clarity of altitude, and I want to describe what she's describing to me, because it's the most complete picture we have right now. Exchange Avenue north of the Livestock Exchange building is mostly cleared of living civilians. The crowd evacuated south or into buildings, which means the northern section of Exchange Avenue is now, effectively, infected territory. The cattle pens have multiple infected individuals still in and around them. The infected from the earliest incidents are significantly slower than they were 30 minutes ago, some barely moving. The southern stockyards, from the Livestock Exchange building to the river, shows a different picture. The Billy Bob situation seems to be contained, which is to say the building is full of people and the doors are closed. There are clusters of infected trying to reach the building, but so far not breaching it. The parking areas south of the main district are partially clear, some vehicles moving, some blocked. The helicopter is also showing something that Kate flagged for me at 5:27 p.m. that I need to pass along immediately. There are infected individuals who have left the Stockyards district and are now on North Main Street moving south toward downtown. Not many, maybe 8 or 10 visible from altitude, but they've cleared the district boundary and they're moving through a neighborhood that has no idea what's coming. At 5:29 p.m., I broadcast a specific warning for the North Main Street corridor, the North Side neighborhood, and everything between the Stockyards and the Trinity River. If you live or work in that area, if you're in a home or a business or a gas station or any building in that zone, this is your warning. Get inside. Lock your doors. Do not come out to see what's happening. 8 to 10 infected individuals are moving through your area right now, and that number is going to grow as more people from the Stockyards become infected and leave the perimeter. The demographic of Fort Worth I'm most worried about in the North Side neighborhood at 5:31 p.m. is the residential blocks of smaller older homes where families live, where kids were playing outside on a Saturday afternoon before the alerts started going out, where elderly residents might not have heard the alerts and might be sitting on their porches because it's actually a beautiful evening with the temperature having dropped to the low 80s and a breeze coming from the southwest. Fort Worth evenings in late June can be genuinely gorgeous, and gorgeous evenings make people be outside. I need people inside right now. Gorgeous can wait. At 5:33 p.m., the Texas Motor Speedway situation developed. This I was not expecting, and I should have been, because on a roundup weekend, the Speedway hosts auxiliary events and parking overflow and all manner of peripheral activity. Kate got a call from someone at the Speedway, 18 miles northwest of the Stockyards, who said they had people arriving from Fort Worth showing symptoms matching what was being described on emergency broadcasts. People who had been at the Stockyards earlier in the day, before the outbreak was identified, who had been bitten during the first wave of incidents and left the area while still in the early symptom phase, and who made it all the way to the Speedway before they transitioned. Texas Motor Speedway holds approximately 200,000 people at full capacity. On a festival Saturday, it's holding somewhere between 15 and 20,000 for auxiliary events. And somewhere in that crowd, there are now people who left the stockyards bitten and have been in the Speedway population for the past hour. At 5:36 p.m., I need to address something that Kate and I have been discussing, and which I've been hesitant to say out loud because saying things out loud makes them real in a way that thinking them doesn't. What started at 4:15 p.m. in the cattle pens at the stockyards has been spreading for 81 minutes. In 81 minutes, it has covered approximately 18 miles of North Texas, which means it's moving at the speed of the cars that people drove when they left the early part of the outbreak before it was identified. Every car that left the stockyards between 4:15 and 5 p.m. with an infected passenger is a seed, and the seeds have been driving to wherever infected people were driving to. I don't know the full geographic extent of this yet. Nobody does. What I know is that it's bigger than the stockyards now. Ray called in at 5:38 p.m. from the file room in the Livestock Exchange building. He's been listening to the building and counting sounds, and he estimates there are approximately 30 people sheltering in various locations throughout the building. He made contact through a door with two of them, a couple named George and Carol, who were in their hotel room on the 3rd floor when it started, and who have been sitting on their bed listening to this broadcast on Carol's phone since 5:15. Ray is trying to build a communication network through the building without opening doors or creating noise that carries outside, which is exactly the right instinct, and I told him so. At 5:41 p.m., a steer from the cattle pens was mentioned to me again by a caller who identified himself as one of the stockyards handlers, who made it out to a service vehicle on the north side of the property. He said he needs to tell me something about the animal that started this. I asked him what he meant, and what he told me is going to take a second to process. He said the steer that attacked the first handler was not behaving like a panicked or agitated animal. He'd been working cattle for 30 years, and he knows what panic looks like in a steer, and it doesn't look like what that animal was doing. He said it was attacking with focused aggression toward human beings specifically, not reacting to stimuli or running blind from fear. And he said he noticed something in its eyes that he noticed later in the first handler, and that he's been trying not to think about since because he doesn't want to believe what it implies. He's implying the steer was infected before the handler, which means whatever this is was in the cattle before it was in the people. At 5:44 p.m., I'm going to sit with that for just a moment because it changes the origin question significantly. The Chisholm Trail Roundup uses cattle that are brought in from ranches across North Texas and the surrounding region. If this pathogen exists in cattle populations and was present in the animals brought to the stockyards for this event, then we're not looking at a Fort Worth outbreak that started today. We might be looking at something that's been circulating in livestock and found its first human transmission vector at a cattle handling event that brought infected animals into proximity with handlers. I'm not a biologist. I'm a radio host. But I know that the federal agricultural authorities, who need to be contacted about a potential livestock disease situation, haven't been contacted yet because everyone has been focused on the human emergency, and I'm going to fix that right now. Kate is getting me the USDA emergency hotline number, and I'm going to call it on the studio line while I continue broadcasting through my lapel mic. At 5:47 p.m., the call to the USDA went through to an after-hours emergency line. I left a detailed message with every piece of information I have about the cattle origin theory, the stockyard's location, the specific pens where the first incident occurred, and my direct line. I don't know if that message will reach the right people in time to matter for today, but I know that if this infection exists in cattle populations, the scope of the problem goes well beyond what's happening in Fort Worth tonight, and the people who regulate livestock in this country need to be working on that problem while we work on this one. At 5:50 p.m., Billy Bob's Texas called the station. The caller was the venue's general manager, A man named Torres, who I've interviewed for local features before, and who is as unflappable as anyone in the entertainment business has to be after 20 years of running the world's largest honky-tonk. He said he has approximately 1,200 people inside the venue right now. The doors are secured. His staff is managing the situation with the professionalism he expects. And he has one question for me. He said, "I've got food and bar stock for a full Saturday night, which means I can feed 1,200 people for about 18 hours. I've got a generator that runs independently of city power. I've got a staff of 60 that has been briefed on the situation. What I need to know is, what's the worst-case timeline before someone with enough resources gets here to change the picture?" I told him the honest truth. Texas National Guard activation takes time. DPS resources are already mobilizing, but they're coming from across a large state. The realistic timeline for significant outside military intervention in the stockyards area is 4 to 6 hours minimum, possibly longer. He said, "All right, then we settle in for the night, and I'll need you to keep broadcasting, because my people in here are going to need to hear that voice telling them we're still in this." Torres, I'm not going anywhere. At 5:53 p.m., I've been on the air for 90 minutes doing something I've never done in my broadcasting career, which is broadcast emergency content without a script, without a rundown, without any of the structures that normally hold a radio show together, based entirely on incoming information and the instinct to give people what they need rather than what would make good radio. This is not good radio. This is just the truth, delivered as fast as I can find it and shape it into something useful. And the truth at 5:53 p.m., 90 minutes into the Fort Worth outbreak, is this. We have infected individuals in the stockyards, in the North Side neighborhood, and at Texas Motor Speedway. We have Billy Bob's Texas holding 1,200 people in a secured venue with an 18-hour food supply. We have the Livestock Exchange building holding approximately 30 survivors, including my producer, Ray, who is alive and thinking clearly, and building an internal communication network through door-to-door contact on separate floors. We have a possible livestock origin that changes the regional scale of this situation dramatically. We have 4 to 6 hours before significant outside resources arrive. And we have 105.3 FM, which is still on the air, which has power and signal and a producer who drove to the station in 12 minutes because she understood immediately that what her city needed tonight was a voice. Stay on this frequency. Fort Worth is a tough city. It's always been a tough city, since before it had paved roads, since it was just a fort on a prairie. It doesn't quit. And neither do we. At 6:01 p.m., Ray established contact with Patricia Nguyen in the Livestock Exchange hotel conference room through a floor vent communication system that he figured out because Ray Delgado is 28 years old and has the problem-solving instincts of someone who grew up in a house where the internet went down regularly and you had to get creative. The floor vent connects the second-floor file room to the first-floor conference room area through what's essentially an old building's Haveg shortcut, and by pressing their ears to the vent cover on both sides, Ray and Patricia can communicate in low voices that don't carry outside the building. Patricia's situation as of 6:01 p.m. is this. 47 confirmed guests and staff in the conference rooms. One guest, the man with the bite wound, is isolated in a single hotel room on the second floor, which Ray is now adjacent to, which is exactly as uncomfortable as you'd expect it to be. Patricia says the man is a 40-year-old accountant from Keller named Dennis, who drove to the festival with his wife, who is one of the 47 people in the conference room, and who knows what happened to her husband, and is holding herself together with a composure that Patricia says she deeply respects. Dennis can be heard through the hotel room door, occasionally. He's not shouting. He's not trying to break out. From the sound of it, he's sitting in the corner of the room and going through something no one should have to go through alone. At 6:04 p.m., Kate flagged something from the helicopter feed that I need to address immediately. The infected individuals who were earliest in the outbreak The ones from the 4:15 p.m. wave, some of them have stopped moving. Not been stopped by force, just stopped, standing still in Exchange Avenue and the surrounding streets, showing significant physical deterioration, and in at least 3 confirmed cases, simply sitting or collapsing without any visible cause. The first wave of infected appears to be reaching the end of their mobile phase, approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes after the initial exposure. 1 hour and 45 minutes. That's the mobility window we're working with. This means the infected currently being created from bites happening right now will begin degrading around 7:45 to 8 p.m. And if new bites are prevented or reduced, the total infected population will be declining rather than growing by 8 p.m. We need to get through about 2 more hours of this before the math starts working in our favor. At 6:07 p.m., the first Texas DPS units arrived at the Stockyards district perimeter. Not inside the district, at the perimeter, because the situation inside is still active, and entering without tactical coordination would create more casualties. They're establishing a perimeter line on North Main Street, Henderson Street, and Northside Drive, and they're preventing any further vehicle or foot traffic from entering the district. Anyone who is going to the roundup tonight and hasn't arrived yet is being turned around. Anyone trying to leave the district on foot is being directed through checkpoints where they can be assessed. Kate is telling me the DPS establishment of the perimeter is visible from the helicopter as a ring of police vehicles around the district boundary. It's the first organized containment structure we've had, and it matters enormously because infected individuals leaving the district on foot is the mechanism that's spreading this to the north side and beyond. Reducing that outflow means reducing how far this spreads tonight. At 6:11 p.m., the situation at Texas Motor Speedway was updated by a Tarrant County Sheriff's deputy who called the station. They have confirmed 3 individuals at the Speedway, showing the violent behavior consistent with what we've described. All 3 have been contained through the use of lethal force, which I understand is terrible, and I'm not going to gloss over the weight of that. And the Speedway is implementing its own shelter-in-place protocol. The roughly 15,000 people there are being directed to the grandstand and support buildings. The deputy asked me to broadcast the Speedway as a do-not-approach zone to prevent people from trying to drive there for safety, because the last thing the Speedway management needs right now is additional vehicle traffic adding to the congestion. Stay away from Texas Motor Speedway unless you're already there. At 6:14 p.m., I received a call from someone who gave me information I wasn't expecting, and which I've been sitting with for the past few minutes, trying to decide how to use. The caller identified himself as Dr. James Ibarra, who works in infectious disease at JPS Health Network here in Fort Worth. And he called because he's been listening to the broadcast from his home in the Ridgely area, and he has professional context that he thinks might be useful. He said, "What I'm hearing you describe is consistent with a prion cascade, not a bacterial or viral infection. Prions are misfolded proteins that propagate by causing other proteins to misfold. They are extraordinarily difficult to destroy, and they are not transmitted through airborne or casual contact, only through direct exposure to infected biological material. In practical terms, this means you cannot get this infection by being in the same room as an infected person. You cannot get it from touching them. You can only get it from their saliva or blood entering your body through a wound. The bite is the mechanism because it delivers infected saliva into broken skin. This is the most important thing Dr. Ibarra told me, and I want to broadcast it clearly. You cannot become infected simply by being near an infected person. They are dangerous because they will attack you and bite you. But proximity alone, breathing the same air, touching the same surfaces, is not a transmission risk. If you are sheltering in a building and infected individuals are outside, your risk is low as long as your building remains physically secure. You do not need to panic because of proximity. You need to be secure. At 6:17 p.m., I broadcast Dr. Ibarra's information, and asked him if he'd be willing to stay on the line as a resource for the rest of the broadcast. He said yes, and he's now on hold on Kate's board and available when I need to ask him something that requires medical framing. Ray updated me at 6:20 p.m. from the file room. He's made contact through the floor vent with Patricia. Through a second vent he located with another group of survivors in the Livestock Exchange's Booger Red's restaurant, which is on the main floor and has a heavy wooden bar and thick walls and about 23 people sheltering behind it. Ray can hear Dennis in the hotel room through the wall. He says Dennis is getting quieter. He says he doesn't know if that's good or bad, and neither do I. At 6:23 p.m., the North Side neighborhood situation became more specific. A caller from West Luda Street, which is 3 blocks south of the stockyard's boundary, reported that she can see 2 infected individuals in the street outside her house from her upstairs window. They've been there for about 12 minutes, and they're moving slowly. Not with the speed and aggression Ray described from the initial Exchange Avenue scene an hour and a half ago. These are probably infected from the early wave, which means they're past their peak mobility. This caller, whose name is Renata, said she has her 2 youngest children with her, ages 4 and 7, and she needs to know if she should stay where she is or try to get to her neighbor's house, which is more solidly built. Renata, stay where you are. You're upstairs, which gives you vertical separation. Infected are showing decreased mobility at this point in their cycle. Moving means going outside, which is the one place you don't want to be right now. Stay upstairs, keep the kids quiet, stay away from the windows, and wait. The DPS perimeter is being established, and this neighborhood will be included in the secured area. Stay where you are. She said okay, and then she said her 4-year-old was asking when they could go home, because they were at her neighbor's house when this started, and now they're upstairs in the neighbor's house, so she's already not home. And she had to tell her daughter that they were on an adventure, and adventures sometimes take a little while. I told her that was perfect. That was exactly the right answer. At 6:27 p.m., Kate has been monitoring multiple emergency frequencies, and she wants me to pass along something that is both concerning and important for everyone to understand about the regional picture. The infected individuals who left the stockyards and vehicles before the perimeter was established have been confirmed at multiple locations across Fort Worth and the surrounding area. Keller, Southlake, Arlington, Bedford. These aren't large numbers. Kate is seeing reports of single incidents or small clusters at each location, but they represent the geographic scatter of the infection's first hour, when nobody knew what was happening, and people drove away from the stockyards, carrying it with them. Tarrant County as a whole is going to have to deal with this, not just the Stockyards District. At 6:31 p.m., the National Guard activation was confirmed by the governor of Texas. Texas National Guard units are being mobilized from multiple armories across North Texas, and the estimated time for first elements to arrive at the stockyards perimeter is 2 to 3 hours. That puts military assets on the ground around 8:30 to 9 p.m. This matches our estimate of the infected population, peaking and beginning to decline around 7:45 to 8 p.m., which means military intervention arrives approximately at the same time the wave is breaking. That's as good as we could hope for. At 6:34 p.m., I want to talk about the cattle, because I haven't stopped thinking about the cattle since the handler called in with the information about the steer, and I don't think we should stop thinking about it either. The stockyards receives cattle from ranches across the region for shows, auctions, festivals. If the prion infection Dr. Ibarra described is present in a cattle population somewhere in North Texas, we need to know which herd it came from, which ranch, and how many animals from that ranch are currently elsewhere in the supply chain. That's a question for federal agricultural authorities and state veterinary officials. And Kate has been trying to reach both while I broadcast, with limited success so far, because it's Saturday evening and the right people are hard to find on Saturday evening. But I want everyone listening who works in agriculture, who works with cattle, who is on a ranch anywhere in North Texas right now, to call this station if any of your animals have been showing unusual behavior in the past week or two. Aggression directed specifically at humans. Loss of normal behavioral patterns. Any neurological symptoms that looked wrong. Call us. We'll get the information to the right people. At 6:38 p.m., Dennis Kelly, the accountant from Keller, who was isolated in the hotel room on the second floor of the Livestock Exchange building, went quiet according to Ray. And then 6 minutes later, at 6:44 p.m., he did not go quiet. He began moving around the room and making sounds that Ray described to me in a low voice with his phone pressed close to his face so it wouldn't carry. And I'm not going to describe those sounds except to say that Ray understood immediately what they meant and immediately moved away from the wall they shared. Patricia Nguyen was notified through the floor vent. Dennis's wife, whose name is Sarah, was in the conference room below. Patricia made the decision to tell her, because Sarah deserved to know, and because if she was going to hear sounds from upstairs, she deserved to understand what they meant. Kate told me Patricia's account of that conversation, and I'm going to hold it privately because some things don't belong on the air. What I'll say is that Sarah Kelly is 41 years old, and she is stronger than most people will ever have to find out they are. At 6:47 p.m., 105.3 FM has been on emergency broadcast for 2 hours and 24 minutes. Kate is here. Ray is alive in the Livestock Exchange building. Patricia Nguyen has 47 people in the conference rooms, and she hasn't lost one of them. Renata is upstairs with her 4-year-old and her 7-year-old on an adventure that's taking a little while. Kaisha is in Lone Star Leather on Exchange Avenue with Dale and his shotgun and 19 other people who made the right choice when the crowd started moving. Mr. Torres at Billy Bob's has 1,200 people and 18 hours of food and a generator and 60 staff members. And somewhere out there in North Texas, the cattle from the Chisholm Trail Roundup came from a ranch that we haven't identified yet. And that is the problem that exists beyond tonight. The problem that will still be here after the National Guard arrives and the stockyards is cleared and the perimeter is lifted and Fort Worth starts figuring out what happened and what it cost. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight's problem is getting everyone on this frequency through the next 2 hours. And we're doing it. At 6:53 p.m., the aerial picture that Kate is describing from the helicopter has shifted in a way I want to capture precisely because I think it represents the turn in this crisis, the moment when the wave peaks and begins to break. And I want you to understand it clearly so you understand what comes next. Exchange Avenue in the northern stockyards is now showing fewer mobile infected than it was 30 minutes ago. The individuals from the earliest wave are either stationary or have collapsed entirely. Kate is counting active mobile infected visible from altitude, and the number is declining. At peak, around 5:30 p.m., she estimated 40 to 50 individuals moving through the district. At 6:53 p.m., she's counting 22. The second wave, people who were bitten during the 5 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. period, are reaching their peak mobility right now and will begin declining in approximately 45 minutes. The third wave, if there is a meaningful third wave, depends on how many new bites are occurring right now, which is hard to know from altitude. But the DPS perimeter has reduced the flow of uninfected people into the district substantially, which reduces the opportunity for new bites. The wave is not broken yet, but it's cresting. At 6:57 p.m., I want to do something I haven't done yet in this broadcast because we've been in pure emergency mode, and I haven't had the right moment. I want to tell you what this station is and why it matters that it was here tonight. 105.3 FM is not a big station. We're not part of a major corporate network. We're a local radio station that serves the Fort Worth area and the surrounding communities. And we exist because people in this region want a local voice, want someone who knows their streets and their events and their cattle shows and their music scene, someone who will do 3-hour on-location remotes from the roundup because they understand why the roundup matters to the people who love it. That's why Ray was at the stockyards tonight with his equipment. That's why Kate drove here in 12 minutes. That's why I'm still at this microphone 3 hours after I got a call I wasn't prepared for. Local radio exists for exactly these moments. Not for the moments when everything is fine and you need someone to play George Strait for your commute, though we are very good at that too. For the moments when the official channels are overwhelmed and the information is scattered and someone needs to sit at a microphone and say, "Stay calm. Here's what I know. Here's what it means. Here's what you should do." If this broadcast has helped you survive tonight, I want you to remember that it exists because this community supports it. And when this is over, when you can safely leave your house and drive past the station on your way somewhere, I hope you'll think about supporting the thing that was there when you needed it. Not because we need a favor, because local voices need local support to keep existing. And after tonight, I think you understand why they need to keep existing. At 7:02 p.m., Ray successfully moved from the file room to the main staircase of the Livestock Exchange building. He needed to move because the file room's outside-facing window showed movement below if he didn't want to be near, and the staircase landing gives him access to multiple floors and multiple shelter options. He's now serving as a kind of internal liaison between the three groups of survivors in the building, moving carefully and quietly between floors, checking status, relaying information. This is not what Ray signed up for when he took the producer job at this station. This is also exactly what Ray is built for, and I'm going to tell him that when this is over. At 7:05 p.m., Officer Santos called in again. She's been operational for over 2.5 hours in an active outbreak environment, and she sounds like what 2.5 hours of that does to a person, which is to say she sounds focused and tired and unwilling to stop. She's reporting from a position at the southern edge of the Stockyards district, holding with 2 other officers, and she has a direct observation count. She says the infected activity in her visual range is noticeably reduced from an hour ago. She's seeing individuals who are barely moving, who are sitting or leaning against walls, who don't respond to noise in the way they were responding to noise an hour ago. She says one infected individual she's been tracking for reference sat down at 6:48 p.m. and hasn't moved since. She said, "David, I think we're watching them run out of whatever this is running on." I told her what Kate had confirmed from altitude, that the numbers are declining and the mobility is declining, and there was a moment of silence on the line that I interpreted as someone who has been holding a tremendous amount of tension for 2.5 hours, allowing themselves one small exhale. She said, "We still have a lot of night to get through." I know, Maria, but the math is changing. At 7:09 p.m., the USDA call came back. An emergency agricultural official from the USDA Veterinary Services reached me on the studio line, and what she told me I'm going to share with you because I think it belongs in the record of tonight. She said they've received reports from 2 ranches in North Texas in the past 6 weeks, describing unusual neurological behavior in cattle. Not widespread, not alarming in numbers, and the symptoms didn't initially suggest anything in the known prion disease family because the progression was atypically fast. They had been investigating. They had not concluded their investigation. The cattle from the Stockyards Roundup are now a priority for identification and full testing of every animal. She also said something I need to broadcast clearly and without alarm, but with full accuracy. If a novel prion variant is circulating in cattle populations in North Texas, the scope of the food safety and agricultural concern is significant. They are activating the National Veterinary Stockpile and coordinating with the CDC. This is being taken seriously at a federal level as of this phone call. Fort Worth's cattle pens started something tonight that the federal government is now tracking from Atlanta. I'm going to let that sit for a moment. At 7:13 p.m., the Kaisha call came back. Kaisha from Lone Star Leather, the woman with her husband and 2 daughters who called in early in the broadcast. She called to give me an update Not because she needed help, but because she'd been listening to us helping everyone else, and she wanted Em to know that they were okay, and that her daughters had decided that Dale, the shop owner with the shotgun, was the coolest person they had ever met. She said Dale had let her older daughter hold the shotgun while it was unloaded and unracked, just to hold it, and the girl had said it was the most Texas thing that had ever happened to her. I laughed at that. A real laugh, the first one in a while, and I think everyone who was listening laughed with me. At 7:17 p.m., Ray confirmed that Dennis Kelly in the second-floor hotel room has stopped moving. He's been still for approximately 25 minutes. Ray is monitoring through the wall. Patricia has been notified. Sarah Kelly is in the conference room with 46 other people who are giving her the kind of quiet, present, adjacent support that 46 strangers in a crisis can give, which is not nothing, not even close to nothing. At 7:21 p.m., the first National Guard advance element arrived at the stockyards perimeter. This is ahead of the estimated timeline, which Kate says is because the activation was processed faster than expected, and there was a guard unit already at a facility in North Fort Worth that could be redirected. It's not the full deployment. It's an advance element of approximately 60 soldiers, but they're here, and they're establishing coordination with DPS and FWPD at the perimeter. The significance of this at 7:21 p.m. in relation to what Kate is seeing from the helicopter and what Officer Santos is observing at street level is that organized armed forces have arrived at approximately the same time the infected wave is beginning its meaningful decline. This is the moment when the balance tips, not instantly, not without continued danger and continued loss, but the moment when the resources available to defend Fort Worth begin to exceed the active threat is arriving right now. At 7:25 p.m., Dr. Ibarra, who has been on hold on Kate's board this whole time, asked to say something. I put him on. He said, I want people to understand something about what recovery is going to look like. Not tomorrow or next week, but over time. Prion diseases are not infectious in the airborne sense, and environmental decontamination of areas where infected individuals were present is going to require careful protocols, but is achievable. The Stockyards District, the streets of the North Side, Billy Bob's, Texas, the Livestock Exchange Building, these places are going to need assessment and remediation, but they are not going to be permanently unsafe. The city is not going to stay in this state. Fort Worth is going to come back from tonight, and I want people to hear that from a medical professional, rather than from someone who is trying to reassure them. Dr. Ibarra, thank you. I mean that completely. At 7:29 p.m., the infected population in the Stockyards District, as counted from altitude by Kate, is 17 active mobile individuals, down from a peak of approximately 50. The wave is falling. The first wave degraded. The second wave is degrading. If new bites have been substantially reduced by the perimeter, and by the fact that most uninfected people in the district are now sheltered inside buildings, the third wave will be small. Outside the district, across Fort Worth and Tarrant County, the scattered infected individuals represent a different kind of problem, one that requires neighborhood-level response rather than district-level containment. DPS and sheriff's units are handling reported incidents across the county, and Kate is telling me that the county-wide picture is not as dire as the Stockyards itself, because the density is so much lower. Individual incidents in residential neighborhoods, manageable with law enforcement response. Nothing like the concentrated outbreak in the festival crowd. At 7:33 p.m., Torres from Billy Bob's called in a third time. He has 1,200 people still in the venue. Everyone is accounted for. Nobody is showing symptoms. He's fed them from the kitchen. He's opened the bar for adults who want it. And he said there's an unofficial country songwriter in the crowd who has been playing acoustic guitar in one of the side rooms for the past hour. And approximately 400 people are sitting in there listening, because apparently what people want when they're scared and trapped is music. I told Torres that was the most Fort Worth thing I'd ever heard, And he laughed, and I could hear the guitar in the background when he held the phone up. At 7:37 p.m., I want you to know something about this city that I've been thinking about through this whole broadcast. Fort Worth is not Dallas. Fort Worth people will tell you this until you understand it, which might take a while if you've never lived here. Dallas is where things happen to you. Fort Worth is where you make things happen. Fort Worth built itself up from a cattle trail crossing and a fort on a prairie, and it has never, once in its entire existence, waited for someone else to solve its problems. Dale, locking his store and handing his shotgun to a 14-year-old girl to hold while her family waited out a zombie outbreak, is the most Fort Worth thing that's ever happened. And that includes the guy who once called my show to tell me he'd roped a wild turkey from his truck on the way to work. At 7:41 p.m., we're approaching 3 hours and 15 minutes of continuous emergency broadcast. The infected peak has passed. Military assets are on the perimeter. DPS is established. Billy Bob's is holding 1,200 people who are listening to a guy play guitar. Ray Delgado is moving between floors of the Livestock Exchange building, making sure 30 people know they're not alone. Patricia Nguyen has 47. Renata has her girls on an adventure. Kaisha has Dale. And we have this frequency. Stay with us. Because we're not done yet, but we're getting there. At 7:48 p.m., a National Guard advance element made its first entry into the Stockyards district. 60 soldiers moving in 4 teams with full tactical equipment, coordinating with Officer Santos and the 2 officers she'd been holding with at the south end of the district. Their entry point was Northside Drive, and they moved north on foot through streets that Kate described from the helicopter as almost eerily quiet compared to what they looked like 2 hours ago. She said, "David, it looks like aftermath. Not like active crisis anymore. Like the moment after a storm when you walk outside and everything is wet and still. That's the most precise description of what's happening in the stockyards right now. And it's the most hopeful thing Kate has said out loud since she arrived at the station. The infected who are still present in the district are mostly stationary, advanced in their degradation, no longer pursuing or attacking. The guard teams are clearing them methodically, which is horrible work that I'm not going to detail, except to say that it's being done by people who have been trained for hard things and who understand why it has to be done. At 7:52 p.m., the first organized survivor extraction began. Guard Team 2 reached the Western Service Corridor of the Livestock Exchange building and made contact with Patricia Nguyen through the building's main phone line. They're establishing a covered evacuation route from the building's east exit to the DPS perimeter, and they're going to move the 47 people in the conference rooms in 2 groups with armed escort. Ray is aware. He's coordinating through the floor vent. He told me at 7:54 p.m. that he's going to be in the second group, and he wants me to know that while he's been sitting in this file room for the past 3 hours, he started writing the broadcast notes for Monday's show on his phone, because there is a lot to cover and he wants to be ready. I told him that was the most Ray thing I'd ever heard him say, and he said he knew. At 7:57 p.m., the 23 survivors in the Booger Red's restaurant section of the building were also contacted and included in the extraction plan. Kate watched the whole thing from the helicopter feed, all 70 people including both groups, moving in a covered column along the extraction route with guard soldiers on the flanks, making it to the DPS perimeter at 8:04 p.m. Every one of them made it. Every one. Kate said something when she watched it that I'm going to repeat exactly. She said, "There they are." That's all she said. There they are. At 8:07 p.m., Sarah Kelly was among the 70 evacuees who made it to the perimeter. She crossed the perimeter line and sat down on the curb, and a DPS officer, who was not expecting to be doing grief counseling tonight, sat down next to her and didn't say anything, just sat there, which was the right thing. Sarah had been in that conference room for 2 hours and 40 minutes, knowing what was happening upstairs and holding herself together for everyone around her, because that was what the situation required. Now the situation required something else, and she did that too. Dennis Kelly is still in the second-floor hotel room. When the building is fully cleared and secured, he'll be addressed. That's the language the guard uses, and it's the right language for what it means. For now, Dennis is in a locked room in a historic brick building in the stockyards, and his wife is safe, and that's what I can say. At 8:11 p.m., Ray exited the Livestock Exchange building with the second extraction group and crossed the perimeter at 8:17 p.m. And the first thing he did when he had cell service strong enough to make a call was call his mother. I know this because I was still on the line with him when he made it, and I could hear him telling her he was fine. He was out. He was standing on North Main Street in the dark, and it was fine. And I heard her voice on the other end, saying something I couldn't make out, but which had a sound I recognized as the specific relief that only mothers produce. I told Ray I'd see him Monday. He laughed and said he'd be there at 6. At 8:21 p.m., the full National Guard deployment arrived at the stockyards perimeter. Approximately 400 soldiers with vehicle support, establishing multiple entry points and beginning systematic sector-by-sector clearing operations. The clearing is going to take most of the night and will continue into Sunday morning, but the resources are now present at the scale the situation requires. At 8:24 p.m., I received a call from a ranch in Wise County, approximately 45 miles northwest of Fort Worth. The caller was a rancher named Gene Holden, who had been listening to the broadcast through his truck radio while working late, and who had something to say that he said he'd been holding off on because he wasn't sure if it was relevant and didn't want to waste anyone's time during a crisis. He said his opinion had changed when he heard me mention the cattle and the unusual neurological behavior. Gene Holden said that he lost 4 head of cattle in the past 3 weeks to what his vet described as an unknown neurological condition. The cattle were showing aggression toward humans that wasn't normal for their temperament, then rapid decline, then death. His vet filed a report with the state veterinary office. He'd been following up on that report and not getting anywhere, and then he turned on his truck radio tonight. He said, "I think my cattle were the start of this. I don't know how to feel about that." I don't know either, Gene, but thank you for telling us. I got the USDA emergency official back on the line at 8:27 p.m. and gave her Gene Holden's name and contact information and the location of his ranch in Wise County. She said they'd have a team there by morning. She said it in a voice that told me this was the piece they'd been looking for, the geographic origin point, the place where the prion jumped from whatever reservoir it lives into cattle, and then to humans at a cattle handling event in the stockyards. Wise County, 45 miles northwest. A ranch where 4 cattle died in 3 weeks, and a vet filed a report, and nobody followed up fast enough. At 8:31 p.m., the Torrent Countywide picture from DPS is as follows. 37 confirmed incidents outside the Stockyards district, spread across 14 different communities in the county. Arlington has 4 incidents. Haltom City has 3. Keller, Southlake, Grapevine each have 1 or 2. Texas Motor Speedway has been fully contained at 6 confirmed and neutralized. The countywide incidents are being addressed by local law enforcement with DPS support. None of the countywide incidents have created secondary outbreak clusters because each one was either caught early enough or was geographically isolated enough to prevent the kind of crowd density transmission we saw in the stockyards. The stockyards was the worst of it. That's not small comfort. The stockyards was terrible. But it means the countywide situation is manageable rather than catastrophic. At 8:35 p.m., Torres from Billy Bob's called in to say the guard has made contact with the venue, and they're planning a controlled extraction of the 1,200 people inside, beginning at 9 p.m. He said he asked the guitar player if he'd mind doing one more set while they waited, and the guy said absolutely, and Torres said it's been the most surreal and somehow fitting thing he's ever seen in 30 years of running a venue. 1,200 people sheltering from a zombie outbreak in the world's largest honky-tonk, while a guy plays acoustic country music. That's Fort Worth. I mean that as the highest compliment I know how to pay. At 8:38 p.m., Officer Santos came back on the radio for the last time tonight. She's being relieved by incoming DPS officers, and she's going off duty, which means she's going to go sit somewhere and experience having the adrenaline drain out of her after 4 hours of operating in an active crisis, which is its own difficult thing. Before she signed off, she said she wanted me to tell people something. She said, "The people in this city did it right tonight. The people who locked their doors and stayed inside and kept quiet and waited, they did it right. The people who barricaded buildings and kept each other calm, they did it right. The ones who called in and gave us information and listened and stayed on the frequency, they did it right. I know it felt like sitting there doing nothing while something terrible happened outside, but that's not what it was. What it was refusing to make it worse. And refusing to make it worse is sometimes the hardest and most important thing you can do. Tell them that. I'm telling them, Maria. I'm telling them right now." At 8:43 p.m., the Stockyards District clearing operation has progressed to the southern section, including Exchange Avenue from the Livestock Exchange building to Billy Bob's. The guard teams are working systematically, and Kate says from the helicopter that Exchange Avenue is almost fully cleared of active infected. The historic street where cowboy culture and Texas music and the cattle heritage of the Southwest have coexisted for over a century will need cleaning and repair and eventually a conversation about what happened here and why. But it's still standing. The brickwork is still there. The wooden sidewalks are mostly intact. The White Elephant Saloon sign is still lit because nobody turned it off. At 8:47 p.m., the Federal Bureau of Investigation contacted the station. I'm going to be honest that I was not expecting the FBI at this point in the evening, but the agricultural origin information, the possible interstate transmission through the cattle supply chain, and the potential for this to be connected to other incidents in other states has elevated this to a federal investigation. The agent who called asked me to preserve all recordings of tonight's broadcast, all caller information, and all communications with sources, including Gene Holden in Wise County. Kate is already doing all of these things because Kate has been doing everything right since she arrived. At 8:51 p.m., the first helicopter medical evacuation from the Stockyards area took Dr. Linda Parrish, the Sharp Memorial physician who treated Officer Santos's partner and 2 other bite victims, TOJPS Health Network for evaluation of her own potential exposure. She'd been operating for 4 hours on scene and had sustained a minor wound in a second-floor window incident that she hadn't told anyone about until the guard cleared the building she was in. She's going to be evaluated and monitored, and she made me promise to mention on air that she thinks the window for effective wound decontamination protocol is significantly better than what the data from tonight might suggest. She's the most doctor thing that's ever happened. At 8:56 p.m., I want to describe Fort Worth at 8:56 p.m. on the Saturday night of the Chisholm Trail Roundup, because I think the description matters. The Stockyards District is being cleared building by 400 National Guard soldiers. The DPS perimeter is holding on all sides. Billy Bob's Texas has 1,200 people inside who are 40 minutes from organized extraction. The North Side neighborhood has law enforcement on every major street, and the residents are inside and accounted for. Texas Motor Speedway has 15,000 people sheltering in the grandstand and being organized for departure. The countywide incidents are all being handled. The federal investigation has started. A rancher in Wise County has provided the origin information. A Fort Worth FBI agent is working through Saturday night because that's what Saturday nights are now. And 105.3 FM is still on the air. 4.5 hours of emergency broadcast. Kate at the board. Ray on his way home to call his mother again because once wasn't enough. Officer Santos, somewhere sitting in her car, going through the sequence of the night in her head, the way people who've been through things do. Then is Kelly in a locked room. Sarah Kelly on a curb. Renata's daughters deciding that adventures are okay actually. Dale, who let a 14-year-old hold his shotgun. George Strait is going to have to wait until Monday. Tonight required something different. At 9:03 p.m., the Billy Bob's extraction began. Kate watched it from the helicopter with the particular attention of someone who has been watching terrible things for 4.5 hours and is very ready to watch something that isn't terrible. 1,200 people moving in organized groups through a guard-secured corridor from Billy Bob's. Texas to buses staged on Jacksboro Highway, each group taking approximately 8 minutes to transit. The whole operation expected to take about 90 minutes to complete. She said the line coming out of those doors looked like the end of a concert, and then she corrected herself and said actually it looked better than that, because people leaving a concert don't know yet if they want to do this again. The people coming out of Billy Bob's know exactly how they feel about being outside. The guitar player was in the third group out. Kate could see him from the helicopter because he was carrying the guitar, which he apparently was not going to leave behind, because the guitar is his, and he brought it to a festival, and he's taking it home. She said she watched him step out of the building into the cool air of the North Texas evening with the guitar over his shoulder and look up at the sky. And she said she doesn't know his name, but she hopes she meets him someday. Me too, Kate. Me too. At 9:08 p.m., I received the call I'd been waiting for since the broadcast started. Ray Delgado called me from his car, where he was sitting in a DPS-cleared parking area off North Main Street, trying to collect himself enough to drive. He said, "David, I need to tell you something about the cattle pens." He said when he was on the walkway at the beginning of all this, before everything moved so fast, he saw something that he hadn't told me yet, because there hadn't been a moment when it fit into anything I needed to know urgently. He said the steer that attacked the first handler was still in the pen below the walkway when the whole thing started, and the steer wasn't trying to attack the handler again, or escape, or do anything you'd expect from a panicked animal. It was standing very still in the corner of the pen facing the wall, and it had been standing that way for the entire time Ray was on the walkway, maybe 40 minutes total, just standing there. And Ray said, "I don't know why that image stuck with me, but it did. An animal at the center of everything that started this, standing perfectly still in a corner, not moving." I thought about that for a moment, and then I said, "I think it was already past its own peak by the time you saw it. I think the animal degraded faster than the humans. I think the prion ran its course in the steer, while the human transmission was still building." And Ray said, "Yeah, that's what I think too." And somehow that made it more comprehensible and more terrible at the same time. At 9:13 p.m., the USDA team reached Gene Holden's ranch in Wise County. The field team lead called me directly because Gene had told her I'd want to hear the initial assessment. She said the ranch shows evidence of the neurological condition in the remaining cattle population, approximately 18 head, showing various stages of what she's now calling rapid onset neurological prion syndrome provisionally, and that they're beginning full quarantine and testing protocols tonight. She said the data from Fort Worth will inform their understanding of human transmission significantly, and that they're treating this as a potential landmark case in zoonotic disease research. She said it in the careful way scientists talk about things that are historically important and humanly devastating simultaneously, and I appreciated the care. At 9:17 p.m., the Stockyards District was declared fully cleared by the National Guard commander on scene, Colonel David Park, in a brief radio communication that Kate monitored. Fully cleared means all infected individuals have been neutralized, all known survivor groups have been extracted or are in the extraction queue, and all areas of the district have been swept by Guard teams. The district is secured. What that means in practical terms is that the Stockyards, as a place, is intact. Damaged? contaminated in ways that will require decontamination, needing assessment before anyone can return safely, but physically present. The brickwork, the pens, the exchange building, intact. At 9:21 p.m., the infection count for Fort Worth and Tarrant County was provided in a preliminary briefing from DPS that Kate received and relayed to me. Total confirmed infected in the Stockyards district, approximately 112. Total neutralized in the district, 94, through a combination of military and law enforcement action. Currently stationary due to degradation and awaiting processing. 18. Total infected across Tarrant County outside the district, 37 confirmed. Casualties among emergency responders, 9 injuries, 2 fatalities. Civilian casualties within the district, being assessed, but believed to be between 40 and 60. Civilian casualties countywide outside the district, 11 confirmed, assessment ongoing. I'm going to say those numbers plainly and without softening, because the people who lost someone tonight deserve to have their loss said plainly. Between 50 and 75 people died in Fort Worth tonight. Families are going to get calls tonight and tomorrow that they're not going to be ready for, that nobody is ever ready for. Fort Worth is going to grieve in a way that will take a long time and will require the kind of community response that this city is genuinely good at. At 9:25 p.m., I received a call from an unexpected source. Dale, the Western wear shop owner, called in from Lone Star Leather, where he and Kaisha and her family and 19 other people have been since approximately 4:45 p.m. The guard had reached their location and secured the block, and Dale called in to tell me something he'd apparently been meaning to say for a while. He said, "I've been listening to you for 11 years, and I've always thought you were a decent radio host and a decent man. Tonight you were something more than that, and I wanted you to know I noticed." Then he said, "Also tell your listeners that Western Wear is having a sale next Saturday if the Stockyards is open, because I could use the business." I'm telling them, Dale. At 9:29 p.m., the Billy Bob's extraction finished. 1,200 people out, every single one of them. Torres called in for the last time to confirm, and his voice was the voice of someone who has survived a version of tonight that most venue managers never have to consider, who did his job with complete professionalism throughout, and who sounds like he would very much like to go home now. I told him he could go home. He said he had to do an inventory count first, because the bar stock situation, after 1,200 people plus 4 hours, needed documentation. I told him that was also very much his call. At 9:33 p.m., the county judge issued a press statement through official channels confirming the emergency declaration, describing the outbreak in careful but accurate terms as a prion-based infection originating in cattle at the Chisholm Trail Roundup cattle facilities, confirming that the district and surrounding areas are under active security operations, confirming that the countywide situation is being managed, and noting that a full press briefing would occur Sunday morning with all relevant federal and state partners. He ended his statement by saying, "The people of Fort Worth handled this with the courage and common sense that this city has always demonstrated in difficult times." He said it like a politician, but he also said it like he meant it, and I think he did. At 9:37 p.m., Ray texted me from his car. He said he was going to drive home, take a shower, and then he was going to sit down and write his account of the past 5 hours, because he didn't want to lose any of it before it became compressed by sleep. I told him to do that. I told him to also tell his mother one more time that he was okay, because 3 times is better than twice. He sent back a thumbs up and then a cowboy emoji, which is very Fort Worth. At 9:42 p.m., Renata from West Luda Street called in. Her daughters are asleep. She waited until they were asleep to call, and then she called because she wanted to say something to the city. She said she moved to Fort Worth 7 years ago from Houston, and for the first 3 years, she thought Fort Worth was just a smaller version of a bigger city, and she couldn't quite understand why people who were from here talked about it the way they talked about it. And then she said something happened slowly, the way things that matter happen slowly, where she understood what they meant. Where she understood that Fort Worth is a place that is about something, that it has a character that isn't performed. It's just what it is. And she said, I understand it better tonight than I ever did before. Renata, so do I. At 9:47 p.m., Phil Deaver called. He's been calling this station through winter storms for 15 years to tell me the temperature on his porch thermometer. And tonight is not a winter storm, but he called anyway. He said the temperature is 81 degrees, which is a reasonable Fort Worth September evening temperature, and a significant improvement on the conditions of the afternoon. And he said from his upstairs window, the street is quiet, and there are police vehicles on the corner. And he made soup again for dinner, because he'd already made it once, and there was still some left. He said it was still good. I'm going to tell you what I think about that for one moment. An 81-degree evening in Fort Worth, with police on the corners and soup that's still good, and a guitar player who carried his guitar home, and Dale's Western Wear having a sale next Saturday, and Torres doing inventory, and Ray writing his notes, and Renata's daughters asleep, and Sarah Kelly on a curb somewhere with a DPS officer, sitting next to her, not saying anything because that was what she needed, and the stockyard secured, and the guard on the streets, and the USDA at a ranch in Wise County, beginning to understand where this came from and how to prevent it from going further. That's Fort Worth at 9:47 p.m. It's not whole. It's not unbroken. 50 to 75 people's families are going to wake up tomorrow changed in ways they can't know yet. Officer Santos is going to carry tonight for the rest of her life, the way people who face terrible things carry them, integrated into who they are, rather than left behind. The stockyards is going to be closed for weeks, and the roundup didn't happen, and the guitar player didn't get to play his festival set, and Dennis Kelly died in a hotel room, while his wife sat in a conference room below him and held herself together for strangers. All of that is true, and Fort Worth is still standing. 3,214 people in Millhaven held through a blizzard. 1,200 people in Billy Bob's held through whatever tonight was in the world's largest honky-tonk. 2 daughters decided adventures are okay, actually. Dale let a girl hold his shotgun. Ray is writing his notes. Kate drove here in 12 minutes. And 105.3 FM stayed on the Wono air for 5 hours and 31 minutes because that's what it's here for. Not for the nights when everything is fine and someone needs George Strait on the commute home. For the nights that don't have a script. For the nights when what you need is a voice at the other end of the frequency telling you we're still in this. We're still broadcasting. We know where you are. And we're not leaving until it's done. It's done. It's not over. The investigation has barely started, and the grief hasn't arrived yet for most people. And there's a ranch in Wise County that's going to be in federal reports for years. But tonight's part is done, and Fort Worth made it through. At 9:53 p.m., I'm going to stay on this frequency through the night because that's the right call. And Kate is going to stay because Kate stays until she decides to leave. And we're going to broadcast the updates as they come in and keep the line open for anyone who needs to call and tell us they're okay, or tell us they're not okay, or tell us anything that helps them get through till morning. But I want to close this particular chapter of tonight with something Ray said to me when he was in the file room in the Livestock Exchange building, listening to people through a floor vent, trying to build a communication network through a 120-year-old building in the middle of a crisis that nobody had words for. He said, David, do you know what I keep thinking about? I said I didn't. He said, I keep thinking about how the building is still here. Built in 1902. Made it through everything. Still here. That's the thing I keep coming back to. The building is still here, Ray. Fort Worth is still here. And tomorrow morning, when the sun comes up over North Texas, and the guard is on the streets and the investigation is underway, and people start trying to understand what happened here on the Saturday of the Chisholm Trail Roundup. This city is going to be something I am very proud to have served with a microphone for as long as they'll have me. This is 105.3 FM, Fort Worth's own. Still broadcasting. Still here. Hello, listener. You made it. So did we.